Well, Brent, the South African government has essentially a twofold approach. One part of it is, as mentioned there by President Ramaphosa, to continue negotiating with the US. The second part of it is to pivot. And the South African government has announced that it's opened up an export help desk for different South African businesses to advise them on how they can start looking at other markets. Now, in different industries, there are sectors that have kind of specifically focused on different regions. For example, with the citrus sector, in one part of the country, in Limpopo, they would have focused on the European market, whereas in the Western Cape, there's a big focus on the US market. And that is the kind of industry that would need to start looking at that pivot position to see if it can start moving its products to other markets, either to Europe or elsewhere.
Of our companies deal with the United States customers. We export vehicles, we export steel and aluminium, we export citrus. So we've got to engage with them and find a way to reach a settlement. So within the window that's still open, we're hoping that we will find a way to settle this matter.
Tariffs are quietly reshaping the global auto industry, and South Africa is right in the middle of it. New trade barriers have made exporting cars more expensive, squeezed manufacturers, and put pressure on jobs that support entire communities. But this is not a story about decline, it is a story about adaptation. As traditional markets become harder to access, South Africa is rethinking its strategy, diversifying its partners, and looking east for new opportunities. China, now a major force in electric vehicles and automotive technology, could play a role in redefining South Africa's future on the global auto map. The question is not whether tariffs hurt, but how South Africa turns pressure into progress.
South Africa's automotive industry has long stood as one of the country's most globally connected and economically significant sectors. Vehicles and components produced locally move across continents, supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs and anchoring supply chains that link factories, ports, logistics hubs, and skilled labor. For many years, this industry benefited from relatively open access to key international markets, allowing exports to grow and investment to remain steady. In recent years, however, international tariffs and shifting trade policies have introduced new challenges that are reshaping the sector's outlook and forcing a strategic rethink. Tariffs have not dismantled South Africa's automotive industry, but they have made its operating environment more complex and competitive. Higher duties in some major export markets have raised costs for manufacturers, narrowed profit margins, and complicated long-term planning. For an industry that relies heavily on exports due to the limited size of the domestic market, even moderate tariff increases can influence decisions about production volumes, investment, and market focus. The impact has been felt across manufacturing plants, component suppliers, and the wider network of services that support automotive production. Manufacturing is particularly sensitive to these pressures because vehicles and parts often cross borders multiple times before reaching final consumers. Each tariff adds cost and uncertainty, making South African products less competitive in markets where rivals face fewer barriers. In response, some manufacturers have had to reconsider which models are produced locally and which markets remain viable for export. This has contributed to uneven output levels and heightened concerns about long-term job security in regions where automotive plants play a central economic role. Despite these pressures, South Africa's automotive sector has not retreated. The country still possesses one of the most advanced automotive manufacturing bases in Africa, built over decades through investment, skills development, and integration into global value chains. Rather than responding to tariffs with panic or withdrawal, the industry has increasingly focused on flexibility, efficiency, and adaptation. Production facilities are being optimized to handle multiple models, suppliers are being pushed to improve productivity, and companies are reassessing how best to position themselves in a changing global market. Employment remains a critical concern, as the automotive industry supports jobs directly on factory floors and indirectly through logistics, maintenance, retail, and services. Tariff-related slowdowns in exports can quickly ripple through these interconnected activities. Policymakers and industry leaders are therefore acutely aware that protecting jobs in the long term depends not on shielding the industry from competition, but on ensuring it remains competitive and relevant. This understanding has shaped a response that emphasizes upgrading capabilities rather than simply preserving the status quo. Exports remain central to this strategy, but the way South Africa approaches export markets is evolving. Instead of relying heavily on a small group of traditional destinations, the industry is working to diversify its reach. This includes exploring opportunities in emerging markets and strengthening ties within Africa, where long-term demand for vehicles is expected to grow as economies develop and urbanization increases. While these markets may not immediately replace lost advantages elsewhere, they offer a pathway to reduce vulnerability and spread risk. Competitiveness in the global automotive sector is no longer defined solely by cost. Technology, environmental standards, and the ability to adapt to new mobility trends are becoming increasingly important. Tariffs have underscored this reality by reducing the room for inefficiency. South Africa's response has therefore included renewed attention to skills development, operational efficiency, and innovation. These efforts are essential if the industry is to compete in a world where production is shifting toward cleaner, smarter, and more connected vehicles. Policy adjustments have played a key role in supporting this transition. South Africa has refined its incentive frameworks to encourage local production, value addition, and export performance while signaling stability to investors. Rather than making abrupt or defensive policy shifts, the emphasis has been on predictability and long-term alignment with global trends. This approach recognizes that automotive investments are capital-intensive and require confidence in the policy environment over many years. Trade policy has also become more pragmatic. The assumption that existing trade relationships will remain unchanged has given way to a more realistic assessment of global dynamics. South Africa is increasingly open to building new partnerships and strengthening cooperation with a broader range of countries. This does not mean abandoning established partners, but it does reflect a strategic effort to balance relationships and avoid excessive dependence on any single market where tariff risks may increase. Within this broader recalibration, China has emerged as a particularly important consideration. China is now the world's largest vehicle market and a major force in automotive manufacturing, especially in electric vehicles and related technologies. For South Africa, engagement with China represents an opportunity to diversify partnerships and integrate into alternative supply chains that may be less exposed to certain tariff pressures. Trade cooperation between South Africa and China already extends beyond finished vehicles to include components, machinery, and industrial inputs. Expanding this cooperation could help stabilize demand for South African producers and open new channels for exports. Investment is another critical dimension, as Chinese firms continue to look for manufacturing bases that offer skilled labor, established infrastructure, and access to multiple markets. South Africa's automotive ecosystem and its position as a gateway to the African continent make it an attractive option in this regard. One of the most promising aspects of deeper engagement lies in technology transfer. China's rapid progress in electric vehicles, battery development, and advanced manufacturing systems has reshaped global competition. For South Africa, partnerships that support learning and skills development in these areas could accelerate the industry's transition into future-oriented production. Such cooperation, however, must be structured carefully to ensure it builds local capabilities rather than limiting South Africa to low-value assembly. The global shift toward electric vehicles presents both challenges and opportunities. Tariffs on conventional vehicles constrain resources just as significant investment is needed to modernize production lines and supply chains. At the same time, the transition offers a chance to reposition the industry for the next phase of global demand. Collaboration with partners that have experience in scaling electric vehicle production could help South Africa shorten the learning curve and avoid costly missteps. This transition cannot succeed in isolation. Electric vehicle manufacturing depends on reliable energy supply, supportive regulation, and complementary infrastructure such as charging networks. Recognizing this, South Africa's approach increasingly emphasizes coordination across sectors, aligning automotive policy with energy, transport, and industrial development strategies. This integrated perspective strengthens the industry's ability to adapt despite external trade pressures. Supply chain resilience has also become a priority. Tariffs and geopolitical tension have highlighted the risks of over-reliance on distant suppliers or single trade routes. South Africa's automotive sector is therefore reassessing how supply chains are structured, exploring greater regional sourcing where feasible while maintaining access to global networks. Engagement with China fits into this strategy as part of a broader effort to balance efficiency with resilience. It is important to approach these developments without exaggeration. China is not a guaranteed solution to all the challenges created by tariffs, nor is cooperation free of risk. Differences in business practices, strategic interests, and market dynamics require careful management. For South Africa, the objective is not replacement of one dependency with another, but expansion of options in a more fragmented global economy. The defining feature of South Africa's response to tariff pressure is agency. By setting clear objectives around investment, technology, and skills, the country can shape partnerships to support its long-term development goals. This approach reflects an understanding that resilience comes from adaptability and diversification rather than reliance on a single trade relationship. Tariffs have undeniably made life more difficult for South Africa's automotive industry, but they have also forced a necessary reassessment. The global trade environment is less predictable than it once was, and success now depends on flexibility, foresight, and strategic alignment with emerging trends. South Africa's industry has shown a willingness to confront these realities and adjust its course accordingly. The automotive sector remains a cornerstone of the economy, with capabilities that few countries in the region can match. By continuing to invest in competitiveness, diversify partnerships, and engage thoughtfully with players such as China, South Africa can transform current challenges into opportunities for renewal. In a world of shifting trade barriers and technological change, the industry's future will be shaped not by tariffs alone, but by how effectively it adapts, innovates, and positions itself for long-term growth.